Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dare I say it, is South Carolina quietly building some momentum on the recruiting trail? Now, look, let's not sugarcoat it. This ain't the first time that I've gotten up here and talked about the potential momentum that's building with South Carolina on the recruiting trail. And it's kind of just resulted in some really frustrating recruiting battle losses. Now, over the next 72 hours, there's an opportunity for South Carolina to really gain some momentum on the trail. We have Landon Duckworth committing in a couple of days. We have Samarian Wingo committing tomorrow. We have four-star offensive tackle Kamari Blair committing tonight. All of these names that South Carolina is either in it for or trending for in Landon Duckworth's case, like there's a chance that South Carolina can finally grab that momentum that we've all been kind of desperately waiting for during the summer months. Now, we're going to preview those commitments, and I got some takes on some of these players, but I want to start with something that, look, I've spent a lot of time not only talking with you guys about, but I've also spent a lot of time just, sitting with myself and thinking about it as well. And that is the strategy that Shane Beamer has taken with South Carolina on the recruiting trail specifically as it pertains to the 2026 cycle. And that is, hey, Shane Beamer is very clearly trying to capitalize on the momentum that South Carolina created on the football field, trying to translate it to the recruiting trail. Look, I really do appreciate the strategy because I think Shane Beamer knows more than anybody else that if you want to cement yourself at the top of the SEC, it starts with the Jimmies and Joes. It starts with talent acquisition. It starts with recruiting the same caliber athletes that a team like Georgia, or that a team like Alabama, or that a team like Texas does. And I think Shane Beamer recognized, look, this South Carolina program just showed that they can compete at the highest level of the sport. They can pump out NFL draft talent. They can compete at the highest level of the sport with young talent doing so, and said, hey, we're one of the more talked about programs in the country rolling into 2025. I would argue that you have two players on this South Carolina roster that are some of the biggest names of the sport. And Lenora Sellers and Dylan Stewart said, hey, let's go see if we can take that momentum that we created around this program on the football field and translate it to the recruiting trail. Here's maybe my take, and you can talk about some of these recruiting battles and you can point to NIL and rev share. And I don't think that would be an unfair thing to point to, especially in a few of these ones. Is maybe South Carolina just a year away from doing what Shane Beamer wants to do? That's probably the thing that I've been thinking about the most, where, look, there's clear interest in some of the best players across the country in South Carolina, but maybe they're waiting for South Carolina to show that the 2024 season wasn't a fluke. And if you can double down and even get better as a football team in 2025, maybe when it's time to flip some of these names late in the process in 2026, or maybe when it's time to start recruiting the 2027 class, maybe you have a little bit more success, going head to head with Georgia for PJ Dean, or going head to head with a program like Texas for a guy like Samari Matthews. That's one of the things I was thinking about, because it's clear. PJ Dean you could have penciled PJ Dean into Georgia way back in the month of January. Older brother played for Georgia. Georgia's been recruiting him really hard at the defensive line position. It's clear that South Carolina has some gravitational pull. Maybe not enough to win the recruiting battles that Shane Beamer wanted to win in 2026, which what I would say is, hey, let's see how the 2025 season goes. Let's circle back to some of these names later in the process come November and December. And then let's see what South Carolina does in 2027 as well. Because I get it's frustrating when you look up and South Carolina only has 10 commitments in the 2026 cycle. I would note that 7 of them are blue chip guys. They got an average player ranking of a 91.1. That's higher than Clemson. That's higher than, I'm a Michigan fan. That's higher than Michigan. And I'm fired up about what Michigan's done on the recruiting trail. It's been a frustrating summer, but I also think that, look, if South Carolina can do what we think they can do on the football field in 2025, I wouldn't be surprised if this strategy from Shane Beamer, where it's, hey, we're going to go big game hunting and we're going to treat ourselves like a program that can go toe-to-toe with anybody in the country, wouldn't be surprised that if you win the football games you're supposed to win in 2025, wouldn't be surprised if some of these recruiting battles start looking a little bit different in the next couple of weeks and months. I've spent a lot of time thinking about that. To the South Carolina fans, especially the ones who are checking this out, like middle of summer, talking recruiting, would love to hear some of your thoughts and opinions. It's truly been even though it's been frustrating, it's really been fun talking this program on the trail. The amount of support means the world. Before we get into some of the decisions, just want to say thank you. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We will be throwing that South Carolina commitment sweatshirt on, breaking down the commitments if and when they come in. Without further ado, let's get into it. Now, let's start with this. Biggest concern that we have. And to me, I'm less concerned about the recruiting rankings, and I'm more concerned about roster building. If you're, it's one thing to have a top 10 class in the country, and if it's all wide receivers and defensive backs, that ain't really that good of a class. You could have 3 5-star cornerbacks, 3 5-star wide receivers, but if you ain't filling out a real football team, don't really matter what the recruiting rankings say. And so when I look at South Carolina, I'm less concerned with landing 25 commitments and getting a top 15 class. And I'm more concerned with, hey, we got to build this roster the right way. The biggest concern here, line of scrimmage, right? I mean, you look at the defensive line, hey, Noah Clark, like him. That's a big body that can move and kind of move along the line of scrimmage, a guy that you need, those body types you need in the SEC. Love Aiden Harris. Love both the Harris. I mean, those are some recruiting battles that show you where South Carolina is. Going head to head with Georgia, going head to head with Ohio State, showing you with the Harris brothers that, hey, South Carolina can start winning these. Really like both of those cats. The biggest concern that I have is, look, South Carolina has showed us that there are certain positions that if you need to address in the portal, you can. At the running back spot, South Carolina went and got Rasul Faison. They could have gotten a guy like Justice Haynes. Go look at the top 10 running backs in the transfer portal. They were all very good. That's a position that even if you don't take a running back in 2026, I'm not necessarily stressing for. You look at the wide receiver position and say, hey, Sequel Patterson, potentially. Samari Wingo, we'll talk about that in a second. I only need 2 wide receivers. That's another position that you can address in the portal. It's also a position that South Carolina has recruited the heck out of going back to 2025. There's not even any room, I think, to take 3-4 wide receivers in this class. The concern we all have, line of scrimmage, right? That's the position where, look, South Carolina was desperately trying to address the middle of that defensive line in the portal. And the reality of the situation was there were not that many SEC caliber football players, and they were all really, really expensive. That tells us, hey, we got to start winning these recruiting battles at the high school ranks. I like Noah Clark. I like Aiden Harris. You probably want to see a few more bodies get added in 2025. Like I'd rather, the 2026 cycle, I'd rather take a couple bodies that we like along the line of scrimmage over a 4-star running back like Amari Thomas. And I'm saying that all day long because I think it's a more important position. It might not make us have a top 15 class, but I think it's the right way to build a roster. My biggest concern right now, got to get some more quality SEC caliber line of scrimmage bodies at the high school ranks. Big decisions coming, and this is what should excite South Carolina fans. Number 1 tonight, Kamari Blair. It sounds like Tennessee is probably the one trending going into the decision, but it's kind of hard to tell. That's not a foregone conclusion. And I'll look at Kamari Blair and say that's an SEC body you want to add to this class. I mean, he is 6'6", 280 pounds, lean body, but a really good athlete and a powerful kid. He's probably not going to be a guy that's a year 1 starter like Josiah Thompson, but a guy that as you go into year 2, year 3, you probably like. And I think there's some significant developmental upside to his game. That's a body that you want to stack within this program. And then you kind of ensure that, hey, somewhere down the road when Josiah Thompson becomes what I think is going to be a top 20 NFL draft pick, you don't have to go to the transfer portal to try to address because you have a guy like Kamari Blair that's waiting in the wings, guys like him. It's really hard to find SEC tackles that you trust in the portal. And I look at Kamari Blair and say, this is a guy that you give 2 years within South Carolina, feel pretty good about him being an SEC starter. Number 2, and this is coming tomorrow, I believe afternoon, 4-star wide receiver Samarian Wingo, who we haven't talked a ton about because throughout the spring and summer months, this kid was kind of a lock to go to Florida. And if it wasn't going to go to Florida, he was going to go to Miami. Well, it sounds like South Carolina's pushing really hard here. Really like him. 6'2", 180, track and field background, basketball background, a little bit of a one-trick pony working vertically down the field. But as you work through his junior year film, there's a little bit more to his game that you like. I think he's a better all-around wide receiver than what you would assume when you look at 6'2", 180 track and field basketball background. You kind of just assume he's a vertical guy. I think there's more to his game. I think you potentially add a wide receiver, one caliber body. And look, you land Samarian Wingo, Sequel Patterson. It's only two wide receivers, but it's two wide receivers that give you two different skill sets, right? Sequel Patterson, a little bit more of a speed and space yards after the catch guy. Samarian Wingo, bigger body working vertically down the field guy. That's good. Like, you could add another five-star flashy wide receiver. I don't know if I care that much because I look at it and say, that's not a position that's a desperate need for South Carolina because of the way they've recruited that position. You land Samari and Wingo, I think you feel dang good about your pass catchers over the next couple of years. And then obviously the big name, Landon Duckworth, decision coming Friday. This one would be the one that kind of lights the fire. You know, he's the face of the program, or not face of the program, but face of the class. Kind of that big name quarterback that has that gravitational pull. uh, you all know how I feel about Landon Duckworth. I think this kid is not only a stud in terms of the traits that he brings to the table. I love the intangibles, his ability to create, similar to the things that we love about Lenore Sellers, making things work when things ain't perfect. I think Landon Duckworth has that ability. He's a guy that has consistently gotten better during his high school career. I mean, 2024 or 2023, excuse me, his junior year, 60% completion percentage, 1,900 passing yards. Then go to his junior year, 67% completion percentage, 3,400 passing yards. A guy that's getting better going into college, guy that has immense upside, guy that has that playmaking ability. Big fan of Landon Duckworth, and he feels like that guy South Carolina lands. Look, it might be a smaller class for South Carolina in 2026, but he's going to allow you to have that gravitational pull that I think matters on the trail. We'll see how it works out. Big decisions coming up over the next 72 hours. We are hoping to have that commitment sweatshirt come on at least a couple of times. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. I get it hasn't been the most fun summer to talk South Carolina on the trail. Hopefully it gets fun over the next 72 hours. Appreciate you guys. We going to talk to y'all later. Peace.